Right now, I am watching $500 million freeze on a screen. Not crash, not disappear, freeze. Every trade that Pinnacle Financial Group has tried to execute in the last 4 minutes is sitting in a queue, perfectly recorded, perfectly preserved, and going absolutely nowhere. The server room hums around me like a mechanical heartbeat. Green lights blink across every rack. The air smells like hot metal, stale coffee, and the specific kind of panic that only happens when powerful people suddenly realize they do not understand the machine they are standing inside. It is 4:47 in the morning in downtown Chicago, and I am not in this building to fix the problem. I am here because I am the only person in the world who can. 3 days ago, this company escorted me out of this building with a cardboard box and a practiced look of corporate sympathy. 3 days ago, a 29-year-old CEO with a Stanford MBA decided that 12 years of institutional knowledge was less valuable than the energy of someone who had never watched a market open. 3 days ago, the man who built this entire system was told his thinking was too legacy, his presence was too resistant, and his future at Pinnacle was officially over. She fired me because of a LinkedIn comment. One sentence, public, mild enough that most people would have scrolled past it without blinking. But that one sentence was apparently enough to convince Rachel Adams that I was a liability. What Rachel did not know was that I had spent the better part of a decade thinking about exactly this moment. Not planning it, not hoping for it, but preparing for it, the way a soldier prepares for a situation he hopes never arrives, but cannot afford to be unprepared for. And now the situation had arrived. And the system was doing exactly what I built it to do. Let me take you back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without understanding what Pinnacle actually was and what my role inside it actually meant. Pinnacle Financial Group was not the biggest firm on Wall Street. It was not a household name. Most people outside the industry had never heard of it. But inside the world of institutional trading, Pinnacle carried weight that its size alone did not explain. That weight came from one thing: reliability. In financial trading, reliability is not a feature. It is the entire product. When a hedge fund routes an order through your platform, they are not thinking about your marketing materials or your office aesthetics, or whether your CEO has a compelling personal brand. They are thinking about one question: will this execute, or will it fail? Pinnacle never failed. Not in the 8 years since I finished building the core of its trading architecture. Not during the flash crash of 2010, when half the platforms on the street went sideways and ours kept processing. Not during 3 major server migrations. Not during 2 separate cybersecurity incidents that our detection systems flagged and quarantined before anyone in management even knew they had happened. The platform I designed moved nearly $500 million a day. During peak hours, it processed 8,000 trades per second. Pension funds, hedge funds, mid-market investors, private wealth managers across 4 continents ran their orders through our infrastructure because our infrastructure did not blink. I was not the face of that success. I was never on a panel, never quoted in a trade publication, never photographed at a conference. My name did not appear on client pitches. I was not that kind of executive. My corner office on the 42nd floor looked out over the Chicago skyline, and most mornings I was already inside the building before sunrise. Not because the job demanded it, but because the system was a living thing to me. And living things need someone paying attention at the edges. For 12 years, I was that person. And for 12 years, being invisible was fine. Being invisible only becomes a problem when someone arrogant enough mistakes your silence for weakness. The man who had kept the silence from mattering was Harrison Cole. Everyone called him Big Cal. He had started Pinnacle 22 years earlier with a borrowed server rack and a lunch counter idea that electronic trading was going to eat institutional finance whole if traditional firms did not learn to build the infrastructure to compete. He was right. He was almost always right about the technical fundamentals of the business. And unlike a lot of founders who understood their origin story but slowly stopped understanding the machinery that made it run, Harrison never stopped paying attention. He walked the server floor. He asked questions in the language of the people who actually built things. He understood, in a bone-deep way, that the company's edge was not its brand or its client relationships. It was the architecture. He trusted me because I did not perform competence. I just had it. That changed when Harrison died. Cardiac event, early, on a Tuesday morning in March. He was 63. He had been slowing down for a year, and the transition planning had been underway longer than anyone outside the board knew. His successor had already been chosen. I took one personal day. Not because I was not affected, but because I already knew what was coming, and I needed the space to think clearly about it before it arrived. Rachel Adams walked into Pinnacle's leadership role at 29 years old with a background in financial technology strategy, 2 years at a consulting firm that specialized in digital transformation, and the kind of confidence that belongs either to people who have been right many times or people who have never been tested. I did not decide she was a problem immediately. I decided to watch. What I watched over the following 8 weeks was a systematic redefinition of what Pinnacle valued. In Rachel's first address to senior leadership, she used the word transformation 11 times. She talked about agile culture, cloud-native infrastructure, and the weight of legacy systems. She talked about companies that had been disrupted because they could not let go of processes designed for a different era. She talked about the courage to make uncomfortable changes. Then her eyes moved across the table and settled on me for just a moment too long before she smiled and moved on. Everyone in that room understood what the pause meant. Rachel had a team. She had brought them with her from her consulting background, a half-dozen young, fluent, expensive people who moved in a pack and spoke in unison. At the front of that pack was Ashley Warren, 24 years old, coding bootcamp background, self-described AI and machine learning specialist, LinkedIn profile updated to Senior Technology Innovation Lead the week after Rachel took over. Ashley walked into our first joint systems review, looked at an architecture that had processed over $60 billion without a single settlement failure, and smiled the way people smile when they have already written their assessment and are only in the room to confirm it. "This is basically digital archaeology," she said. She laughed. Not cruelly, almost casually, like she was commenting on a shared understanding she assumed everyone in the room already held. "The entire backbone needs to come out. Microservices, AI-driven optimization, full cloud migration. We can't be running strategy on infrastructure this old." I sat across from her and said nothing. Not because I had nothing to say, because there was too much to say, and none of it was going to land in a room where the new power structure had already decided the verdict before the trial. What Ashley was looking at was a system that had survived conditions she had never seen. She was looking at contingency architecture built after real failures. She was looking at deliberate redundancy that existed, because I had watched what happens when systems that seemed smart enough turned fragile under real market pressure. She was looking at an old wall and thinking, why is this here? Without understanding that the wall was load-bearing. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday morning, unremarkable in every way except what it cost me. Markets were running smoothly. I was reviewing a latency pattern in the overnight settlement logs, the kind of small anomaly that would not become a problem for weeks, but would become a painful one if it went unaddressed. My phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. Rachel had posted. Glass conference room, young faces around a table. The kind of image designed to signal momentum. The caption was something about transformation requiring courage, standard fare. But in the comments, responding to a technology director at another firm who had asked about the challenges of culture change, Rachel had written something that I read 3 times. She said the hardest part of real transformation was helping people understand they were not irreplaceable, that every organization carried dead weight in the form of people who had mistaken longevity for indispensability. Old guard thinking, legacy personnel, comfortable with the past because the past was what they understood. I stared at the screen for a long moment. 12 years, no critical failures. $500 million a day moved safely. Clients who had stayed with Pinnacle specifically because the platform never embarrassed them. 3 cybersecurity threats neutralized before they became incidents. 2 server migrations that could have caused days of downtime, completed over long weekends with no client disruption. That was what she was calling dead weight. My fingers typed before my patience could catch up. 1 sentence. Experience beats enthusiasm every time. Some foundations are worth preserving. I posted it and went back to the latency logs. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Human Resources. Conference room C was waiting. Rachel sat at one end of the table with an HR representative named Patricia beside her. Ashley was in the corner, laptop open, already looking at a slide titled Legacy System Transition Plan. My name was not on the slide. The position I held was listed under Resources to be reassigned. The termination conversation lasted less than 8 minutes. Rachel said, my comment was dismissive of new leadership, resistant to necessary change, incompatible with the culture she was building. I told her calmly what the system actually did, the volume it handled, the failure rate, the years of incident-free operation. She heard the words the way someone hears a foreign language, present but not registering. Patricia slid an envelope across the table. Effective immediately, my access had been revoked. Security would escort me to collect personal items. My transition assistance package was outlined on page 3. They had locked me out of the system before they finished firing me. I looked at the envelope for 1 beat. Then I said, understood. Rachel blinked. She had expected something else, an argument maybe. A moment of visible hurt she could later describe to the board as proof that the decision had been necessary. I gave her nothing. I stood up, left the envelope on the table, and turned toward the door. If the culture has moved past what I represent, I said, then this is the right outcome. She asked, almost confused. That's it? That's it. I glanced at Ashley, still standing with her laptop and her transition plan. Good luck with the migration, I said. Then I walked back to my desk to collect my things. Ashley followed several steps behind, speaking loudly enough for the surrounding desks to hear. You don't need to worry too much about documentation, she said. We're moving away from legacy personnel dependencies. The floor went quiet. 20 people found reasons to look at their screens. 1 junior developer near the window, a young man named Marcus who had joined us 8 months earlier, gave me a single small nod as I passed. He knew. Some people always know when they are watching a mistake being made, even if they cannot say it out loud. I signed the paperwork downstairs, shook the security guard's hand because it was not his fault, walked out into a Chicago afternoon that was colder than the forecast had suggested. Then I went home, and I waited. Here is what Rachel Adams did not know about the system she had just inherited. When you build financial infrastructure from the ground up, You do not only write code for what the business needs today. You write code for the day something goes wrong. You build for failure scenarios that have not happened yet. You install safeguards nobody will ever praise you for, because if they work correctly, nobody will ever know they were there. 8 years earlier, Harrison Cole had called me at 2 in the morning. I was already in the building. We were eating cold takeout in the server room because a maintenance window had run long and neither of us wanted to leave until the overnight replication verified clean. He asked me a question that did not sound like a business question at first. He said, "What happens if I die and someone takes over who thinks modernization means pulling out the roots?" I had thought about versions of that question before. Not morbidly, practically. Organizations outlive the people who understand them. That is one of the fundamental risks in any technology-dependent business. So I had already built him an answer. We called it Continuity Protocol Delta. It was not a trap. It was not a revenge mechanism. It was a safety system, documented in the architecture, approved under the company's emergency risk controls, designed to do one thing: protect the trading infrastructure from decisions made by people who did not understand what they were making decisions about. Every morning, the system required a silent handshake, a rotating senior administrator verification that told the trading engine an accountable, experienced operator was present and monitoring. Not a password, not a badge swipe. A layered biometric and cryptographic confirmation that could only be completed by someone with full senior-level system credentials. My credentials. If that handshake went missing for 72 consecutive hours, the system would assume something was wrong. A security breach, a hostile transition, a leadership changeover that had removed the people who understood the risk controls. And then it would do what any careful guardian does when it is suddenly unsupervised. It would stop trusting the speed. Conservation mode, as Harrison and I had named it, sounded gentle on paper. In practice, it was a quiet catastrophe for a platform operating at the volume Pinnacle had grown to handle. Every transaction over $10,000 would remain perfectly protected, accurately recorded, and safely queued. Nothing would be lost. Nothing would be corrupted. The regulatory record would be immaculate. But nothing would move without manual senior administrator approval. At the volume Pinnacle now processed, manual approval was not difficult. It was impossible. The first call came Thursday morning. Ryan Collins from operations. He kept his voice casual, but I could hear the shape of panic underneath it, the way you can hear a crack in plaster before the wall actually shows it. "Hey, Caleb. Sorry to bother you. We're getting some weird latency flags in settlement processing. Ashley thinks it's probably variants from her new monitoring scripts. You ever seen anything like that with the legacy config?" I was standing in my kitchen in sweatpants, drinking coffee. "Run the standard diagnostic sequence," I said. "If the logs come back clean, a controlled restart on the secondary nodes should clear it." He thanked me, hung up. But I already knew what was happening inside that building. The system was noticing my absence the way a careful machine notices when the environment shifts outside normal parameters. Not broken, not panicking, just watching, counting, preparing. By Thursday afternoon, the symptoms had multiplied. API authentication warnings were stacking in the background logs. Server thermals were running slightly high because someone had adjusted the cooling schedule for human comfort, without understanding that the machines needed different throws during extended processing cycles. Small request timeouts that looked like network noise to someone who did not know what to look for. To Ashley, these were minor optimization issues. To me, they were the sound of a countdown. 48 hours had passed since my last authorization handshake. Deep inside Pinnacle's server farm, Continuity Protocol Delta was measuring the absence with the patience of something that had been waiting for exactly this. Friday morning, market open 9:30. At 9:30 and 47 seconds, the protocol reached its threshold, and Pinnacle's trading engine stopped trusting itself. Not dramatically, not with an error message or a system crash or anything that would have felt like a crisis in the first 30 seconds. The platform stayed online, every server stayed warm, every interface stayed responsive. The system continued accepting orders and logging them faithfully. It simply stopped executing them automatically. Every major order entered the queue, waiting, calm, immovable without a senior administrator override. The queue began filling at 8,000 entries per second. By 9:35, the first trader complaints appeared on industry message boards. Orders stuck, exits delayed, entries not confirming. By 9:45, the queue held more transactions than any human team could manually clear in a week. By 10 o'clock, Pinnacle's name was appearing on financial news feeds with words like outage and execution failure and client impact. None of those words were accurate. The system was not failing. The system was protecting itself from the people who were running it. I sat in my apartment in Lincoln Park, watching the coverage spread across 3 screens. The story moved fast. Within 90 minutes of market open, trading desks at other firms were routing around Pinnacle, not because the platform had broken, because nobody inside Pinnacle could explain why it had stopped. And in finance, unexplained is worse than broken. Inside the building, I knew exactly what the floor looked like. Account managers fielding calls from clients who were watching losses accumulate in positions they could not exit. Compliance teams pulling incident logs that told them nothing useful. Technology staff running diagnostics on a system that showed no errors because there were no errors. Executives in conference rooms demanding answers from people who did not have them. And somewhere in that noise, Rachel Adams was learning the difference between understanding a system on a slide deck and understanding it in the middle of a crisis. At 10:15, my landline rang. The caller ID showed Brandon Foster, chairman of the board. I had met him perhaps a dozen times over 12 years, mostly at quarterly reviews where I presented infrastructure reports that he listened to politely without understanding much of what I was saying. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. His voice was tight in a way that told me he had been in a room full of shouting people for the last 40 minutes and had stepped out specifically for this call. "Mr. Rodriguez," he said, "I think we need to have a conversation." Behind him, I could hear it. Not just tension, real noise, the specific chaos of people who are responsible for large amounts of other people's money and have just discovered they cannot account for the movement of any of it. "How are the markets treating you today?" I asked. A pause. Then he asked carefully whether I had done this deliberately. "I didn't do anything," I said. "I was terminated. I haven't touched a company system since Patricia handed me an exit package in conference room C. What you are experiencing is the trading platform detecting the removal of its senior authorized operator and activating the safety protocols that Harrison Cole and I built into the system 8 years ago to protect against exactly this kind of transition." Another pause. "How do we fix it?" I told him the truth. The system required senior administrator override credentials to unlock automated execution. Those credentials were biometrically and cryptographically tied to my authorization profile. Ashley did not have them. Rachel did not have them. No one in the building had them. The only person who could open the door was the person they had escorted out of the building with a cardboard box 3 days earlier. Foster asked what I wanted. I had thought carefully about this question during the 3 days since my termination, not out of bitterness, out of clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you have been invisible for 12 years and the silence finally breaks open and shows you exactly what it contained. I don't want a consulting fee, I said. I want my role restored, but not as Chief Technology Officer. He waited. I want to be appointed Chief Risk Officer. I want a seat on the Risk Management Board, and I want written authority, board approved, over every decision that touches trading infrastructure, production system access, and critical architecture. His voice shifted. A board seat, Caleb. You were a technical employee. That sentence told me everything I needed to know about how the board had understood my role for 12 years. No, I said very quietly. I was the technical foundation of your company's most valuable product. Today you found out what that means. The noise behind him surged. Someone was saying a number I recognized as the estimated client losses from delayed execution. Someone else was saying the word regulators. The exposure is growing every hour, Foster said. Yes, I said, it is. You understand the position the board is in. I understand it completely. That is why I am offering you a simple choice. Restore me with the authority that my role has always actually required, and I will walk into that server room and restore automated execution within the hour. Or keep explaining to your clients why the most reliable platform on the street cannot process a sell order. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I'll call you back in 30 minutes, he said. Take your time, I said. The queue will still be there. At 12:43 in the afternoon, my inbox received a company-wide announcement. Effective immediately, Rachel Adams was being reassigned to Chief Operating Officer, focusing on business strategy and external partnerships. The announcement used careful language, voluntary transition, leveraging her strengths. Nothing about trading systems or server rooms. Caleb Rodriguez had been named Chief Risk Officer, appointed to the Risk Management Board with primary oversight of technology infrastructure stability, production system security, and critical architecture controls. I read it twice. Not because I was surprised. Because after 12 years of being the man nobody mentioned, the company had finally written down, in a document that would be filed with the board, and copied to every senior leader, what had always been true. The system ran because I understood it. The money moved because I protected it. And the empire stood because someone had the humility to respect the foundation before they started renovating the walls. I finished my coffee, put on a coat, and drove back downtown. No security escort this time, no cardboard box, no practiced expression of corporate sympathy from anyone in human resources. This time the lobby cleared a path for me. When I reached the server room, Foster was there with 3 board members, 2 attorneys, and Rachel, standing in a cluster near the main console. Ashley was at a workstation running commands the system kept politely declining to execute. The room smelled like burned energy drinks and quiet desperation. I did not make a speech. I sat down at the main console. The familiar authentication prompt appeared. Senior Administrator access required. I placed my hand on the biometric scanner, entered my personal override sequence, watched the protocol status screen shift from amber to green. Then I authorized the queue. 10,000 transactions began moving. 50,000. 100,000. The room went absolutely silent, in the specific way rooms go silent, when the thing that has been wrong for hours suddenly corrects itself all at once. 20 minutes later, the backlog had cleared. Automated execution had resumed. Pinnacle's platform was breathing again. I turned from the console. Nobody in the room was smiling. Foster looked like a man who had aged several years over the course of a morning. The attorneys were already on their phones. Rachel stood near the far wall, arms crossed, face carefully composed, but her eyes showed something I had not seen in them before. She had believed her own confidence completely. She had looked at 12 years of quiet reliability and called it legacy thinking, and it had not occurred to her that quiet reliability might have a reason for being quiet and a reason for being reliable. Now she knew. I did not take that moment to lecture her. It was not about making her feel small. I had no interest in that. I looked at Ashley first. Start with the overnight settlement documentation, I said. All of it, not the summaries, the actual logs, going back 5 years. You are not going to touch production architecture again until you can explain to me in your own words why every major decision in that documentation was made the way it was. She nodded. No attitude, no laptop confidence, just a quiet, "Yes, sir." Then I turned to Rachel. Nothing personal in any of this, I said. But the next time you want to transform something, make sure you understand what it is holding up before you start pulling pieces out. She held my gaze. I understand, she said. I owe you an apology. I nodded once. That was enough. The months that followed were not about victory. They were about repair. The first thing I built as Chief Risk Officer was a documentation mandate. Every system that touched trading execution required comprehensive knowledge transfer records. Not slide decks. Not architectural diagrams that looked good in presentations. Actual operational documentation that a capable engineer could follow at 3 in the morning when something went wrong and the person who built the original system was not available. The second thing I built was a mentorship structure. Every junior developer at Pinnacle was paired with someone who had real operational scar tissue, not someone who had taken courses, someone who had been in the building when things broke badly and had learned from what the failure actually felt like. Ashley surprised me. Once the performance of confidence was no longer available to her, what was underneath it turned out to be something real. She asked questions I did not expect from someone who had arrived with such certainty. She stayed late studying documentation. Nobody her age thought was worth reading. She started coming to me not to propose changes, but to understand why the existing choices had been made. By the end of the first quarter, she had become one of the more careful junior architects on the team. Not the most innovative, not the fastest, the most careful. In financial infrastructure, careful is worth more than fast. Rachel changed too, though more slowly and more quietly. She remained the face of the business. She was good at strategy, good with clients, good at the parts of the job that required confidence and fluency, and the ability to project calm. But before any major technical decision, she came to me first. Not as a formality, as a genuine question about risk. We argued sometimes. That was fine. Argument between people who understand different parts of a complex system is how good decisions get made. What mattered was that the arguments were now about substance, not ego. That was the real outcome. Not the board seat, not the title, not watching a room full of powerful people discover that they had underestimated the person they were standing inside the work of. The real outcome was that Pinnacle became the kind of company where experience and innovation were required to justify themselves to each other before either one got to make a unilateral decision about something that mattered. That is not a small thing. Most companies never learn it until the cost of learning it is too high. I have spent my career being the man in the room who does not make speeches, who does not have a polished personal brand, who does not perform leadership, who shows up before sunrise and checks the logs and notices the small anomalies before they become large ones, who builds things that work quietly and well and for a long time. People like Rachel come along and see that quietness and mistake it for absence. They mistake the reliability for ease. They mistake the stability for simplicity. They think because nothing has broken, nothing is holding it together, and they start pulling at things to see if they are really necessary. They are always surprised by what happens next. I am not telling this story to celebrate what happened to Rachel or to anyone else at Pinnacle. I am not telling it as a warning or a threat. I am telling it because I know there are people listening to this right now who have spent years holding something together, quietly, without credit, and have watched someone walk in with a big title and a confident smile and start dismantling the thing you built because it did not look impressive enough from the outside. This story is for you. Experience is not the enemy of innovation. It is the memory that keeps innovation from becoming a catastrophe. It is the scar tissue that knows where the walls are load-bearing. It is the voice that says wait, not because it fears change, but because it has seen what happens when you change the wrong thing too fast. That voice matters. It has always mattered. And sometimes, the most satisfying thing in a career is not the moment you are recognized. It is the moment the people who dismissed you finally understand the shape of what you built, because they are standing inside the consequence of trying to build over it. One last thing. After the crisis settled, Brandon Foster asked me to remove Continuity Protocol Delta from the system entirely. He said the board felt it represented a liability. He said it was important for leadership to feel they had full control of the infrastructure. I told him the old version had been removed. That part was true. What I did not tell him was that the replacement was already in place. Cleaner, better documented, formally approved under the emergency risk controls the board had granted me authority over as part of my new role. Not a personal safeguard, a systemic one. The kind that does not threaten anyone and does not interfere with anyone, but that quietly guarantees that the next time someone with authority and no understanding tries to hand the keys of a $500 million machine to someone who has never driven in traffic, the machine will remember who built it, because there will always be a next time. There will always be another Rachel who walks in with a vision and mistakes the foundation for furniture. There will always be another Ashley who looks at something that has survived a decade of real conditions and thinks the survival itself is evidence of weakness. And when that day comes, the system will still be there. Patient, careful, remembering. My name is Caleb Rodriguez, Chief Risk Officer, former Army. Still the man who keeps Pinnacle alive. Because 12 years ago I understood something that arrogant people never want to learn. The most powerful thing you can build is something that does not need you to be present to protect it. It just needs to remember why it was built in the first place. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. I want to know, have you ever been the person holding something together that nobody noticed until it was gone? Have you ever watched someone confident and inexperienced walk into something you built and decide it was obsolete before they understood it? Tell me what happened. And if you believe that experience, quiet preparation, and the kind of patience that outlasts arrogance will always find its moment, subscribe to Alex's Revenge Justice. Stories like this are what we are here for. The quiet ones. The ones who build the foundations. The ones who let the room figure it out on its own. Because the room always figures it out eventually.